Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Richard O'Sullivan, and today we're going to review the battlefield story, focusing on the 38th Irish Brigade on the east coast of Italy, the 78th Division, obviously, but really focusing in on the 38th Irish Brigade's story in latter part of October 1943 into the early part of November 43. Last time we chatted about Termoli, the Battle of Termoli, which was a difficult period for the Irish Brigade and the 78th Div. The capture and the reduction of the cementing of the bridgehead was the 6th of, just admitting two more, the 6th of October. Welcome to new customers coming in. I'm not sure who it is, so I don't need to introduce yourself. Andrew Warren, I think, and another person. But we're just starting the presentation and just saying that we're going to feature today the October 43 into November 43 period for the Irish Brigade. As always, in these presentations, just want to tip my hat, if I had one on, which I usually do, to my father, CHMS Edmund O'Sullivan, who was present with the Irish Brigade from Algeria in November 42 to the Austria, March 46. So, Dad, we always remember you in these stories. Just a recap on the Allied commanders in Italy in the end of 1943, still after Termoli, same campaign as we spoke about. The commander-in-chief was Eisenhower. Alexander was the operational Allied armies in Italy leader, General Alexander. And the two army commanders, the specific army commanders of 5th and 8th Army was Mark Clark and Bernard Montgomery, the famous figures, and their names live to the current day in either infamy or famous memory. In October 43, just a recap really about the Allied advance and where they'd got to. So there were two strands, which was on the west coast, the 5th Army under Mark Clark. Two corps were advancing ultimately in the direction of the Liry Valley. But on the left were the 10th, the British-led 10th Corps under Richard McCreary, and inland was the 6th American 6th Corps under General Lucas, later became quite well known at Anzio. So on the west coast, the advance of the 5th Army continued north of Naples to the Volturno River, and ultimately they would reach the Liry Valley at the end of 1943, early 44. But we won't speak about that campaign as much at this time. On the Adriatic coast, the 8th Army under Montgomery, so there was a two corps, and in the Central Highlands, there were two corps of advances. The 5th Corps on the coast, the actual coast, the 78th Division, which we'll feature largely today. The 8th Indian Division, the first campaign in Italy, they joined, and there was armoured support by the 4th Armoured Brigade. Inland in the mountainous area were the 13th Corps under Miles Dempsey, who became famous obviously later at Normandy, the 5th Infantry Division and the 1st Canadian. In November, ultimately, they reached the Sangro River at Castel di Sangro. But the campaign objective still, even though it was October 1943, was somehow to reach Rome by the end of the year. It was becoming more and more difficult, deterioration of weather, etc. And the dual advances on the east and west coast were seeking to get to Rome on the east coast to try and get to Pescara and then cut the lateral road to Rome, which would force the German retreat. So the usual story, reach somewhere by Christmas. In this case, let's reach Rome by Christmas. It was starting to look a lot more difficult at this time. German positions, and it's just a recap. The peninsula of Italy, as you know, is long, and there's a mountain strand, mountain spine throughout. On each coast, rivers were going east-west, or if we let's call it east-west, but the river lines all throughout the peninsula of Italy. So the German positions under General Herr, they ultimately had 5 to 6 divisions on the Adriatic coast, which we're concentrating today. Not all the defensive positions were hard positions. They were a mix of still strong positions, but the first two, we've mentioned Victor Line around Termoli, that first red line. The second one, which we'll speak about today, Trigno River, the Barbara line, and a more permanent position, which stretched right across the peninsula, Cassino and beyond, was the much vaunted Winter line. On the east coast was following the strand of the Sangro River and moved across to obviously the Garigliano, Rapido River, and the Gari River, which again will be a feature of other presentations. 78th Division, which Ron knows so well, the Battle Axe Division, still led at this point by Vivian Everly, 3 infantry brigades. Sorry, there's a lot of support arms. I'm only putting up the infantry brigade. Sorry, everyone, but just to make it easier for myself, the 3 infantry brigades of the 11th, 36th, and 38th Irish Brigade, the Irish Brigade under Nelson Russell. Vivian Everly would be leading 78th Division until the end of the year, and then he would swap with General Keatley, who was at that stage head of the 6th Army Armoured Division. But Vivian Everly, very tall man, we featured him slightly last time. Who were the Irish Brigade? Just to recap on them, commander at this stage was Nelson Russell. That picture was taken in Tunisia in 1943 early, so Beach and Butler leading the 1st Battalion, Royal Irish Fusiliers, the Fogs. Neville Graysbrook leading the 6th Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. And not in the picture is Harry Rogers. In this picture, Pat Scott, who later became the commander of the Irish Brigade, was in this picture. And for the Irish Brigade, they had the heavy machine guns of D Company, the 1st Kensingtons, as well as the artillery and the sappers, the 17th Field and the 214 Field Squadron, and various other units supportive. And Ron can tell us what he was involved with later. So, this period of 4 weeks that we're going to talk about today, really, as I say, concentrating the Irish Brigade story along the East Coast. And the 4-week period, it's only from Termoli to the Sangro River is actually only about 35 miles, 40 miles, but it actually took them a month to progress to the Sangro. So that included the capture of Pataziato, just north or to the west of Termoli, northwest of Termoli. Then the crossing of the Trigno River, which we feature heavily in this presentation, and then the capture of the hilltop town of San Salvo, which allowed the 78th Division as a whole to move forward to the strongly held winter line near the Sangro. But today we're featuring those 3 areas. After the shock, it's fair to say that the problems at Termoli, where the bridgehead was almost extinguished by the Panzer Division, Montgomery said we should pause for a few days, 10 days in fact, while we are building up a supply material. Don't want to push too far at this stage, but said if there's any opportunity to move forward, take it. And this is Nelson Russell, the brigadier, said, yes, we thought we could take the Pataziato Ridge, about 8 miles northwest of Termoli, and from which you had a fantastic view over the Trigno River. Just one point on the German defensive lines, which I didn't mention. Actually, the river lines were strong, obviously the river itself and the valley of a river, but actually most of the strong points were 2 or 3 miles beyond the river line. So you could cross the river and face artillery lines there, but actually the strong infantry groups of the German forces were quite often 2 or 3 miles behind at the Sangro and the Trigno. In both cases, this is where the problems really rose. So after that week or so delay, the decision was taken to go into Patasiotto, the small village of Patasiotto, and take it on. And the London Irish were put forward, two companies of the London Irish. So the evening of the 18th and 19th, they attacked Patasiotto, a nighttime attack. So two companies, F&G, and the Colin Gibbs and Geoffrey Phillips, and the tanks of 46 RTR. And they entered the old town. Probably all looks a bit old town for everyone who visits nowadays. But actually they got into the town quite quickly, and E Company joined the assault and went into the new town. So by dawn, they'd actually taken over the town village of Patasiotto. And there was very limited defense. I think the artillery did its job, and the German forces were stunned. Very few casualties, although the H Company second in command, Captain Fitzgerald, was injured, and that actually led to change of leadership of H Company after that attack. My father, I will refer to him every so often, so he joined with E Company on the day, the 19th, entered. Nice quiet pictures there in Patasiotto. Don't know whether that's old town or new town, but that was a Sunday morning when we took that photograph. And Dad came into Patasiotto and found it pretty grim, actually, but understandably the forces of the residents of Patasiotto weren't willing to leave their houses, so they were throwing some of their mess out the door. And once they went into town, they had to clear the town up. Sorry, a bit of an unsavory comment, it's fair to say, but that's the sort of reality, I suppose, apart from the difficulties of each battle. So my father with E Company came in on the afternoon of the 19th of October, and that little bit of signage below, I'm not sure whether there was actually, perhaps that actually was something they put up on the road, the police to direct people to be careful about Patasiotto, a beautiful town, but not so beautiful that day. Just mentioned, I may not have been totally correct, because at Termoli, the H Company OC, Bill Westcott was severely injured, and he was medevaced out and taken away. Captain Fitzgerald took over H Company soon after, but he was injured, and Desmond Woods, who was a pre-war regular officer with the Royal Ulster Rifles, had fought in Palestine and received a military cross, a very young man in Palestine. He joined the London Irish in the early part of October, actually on about the 10th of October, just after Termoli. And initially he became a second in command of H Company, but soon realized that he would quickly, and was appointed company commander. After Patasiotto, the decision was made to go to the Trigno River to check out whether they could bridge the Trigno River, which was about 5 or 6 miles further forward. So Desmond Woods was sent forward, another platoon also was sent forward. Desmond himself, on the afternoon of the 21st, early evening, took a platoon out. Kevin O'Connor, the second in command of the London Irish, asked Desmond to take over a platoon. At the time, Desmond was a captain, and he remarked it was his last patrol because he was quickly promoted to OC, but he took the platoon out, and the brigadier, as you've probably seen a few films on the Western Front, well, take that bridge, and everyone was getting excited because there was a 500-foot span bridge still over the Trigno at this point. The river valley, and I'll show pictures later of the Trigno, is quite, the actual river bed is quite wide, and it's like flash flooded, but there was quite a hope that they could take an intact bridge. Given the organization of German forces, you might already realize that the organization perhaps may not allow this. So Desmond went out with a patrol. He took a platoon with him, checked to see whether the bridge was intact, and if it was the banks are not terribly steep, and if there was a lot of water. If the bridge went up, could they bridge it anyway, and to do it as quickly as possible. Yeah, I'm sure some of you who have been in the army know that sort of behaviour pattern. Get it done. And this is the current bridge there. Desmond returned. He was called back after he'd made the assessment. The bridge was still there. He remarked, actually, the German forces, during the daytime, he couldn't see them at all. He said they were very good at hiding themselves. He said much better than the British forces, he felt. You know, being an experienced, he was only a young man still, but he was an experienced officer even then. He reported back to Major O'Connor, and the message and communication was sent up to brigade level and army level, divisional level, and then beyond to say, let's bring the Irish Brigade up and try and capture this bridge. Brigadier Russell remarks about this. Everly came rushing out of breath saying, "You've got to take it now." But of course, Nelson Russell was pretty skeptical and saying, it's going to go up. You know, if we try and take it, it's going to be obviously going to be blown up. And the Fogs were brought up, a company of Fogs were brought up, C Company were brought up to take the bridge, hopefully. But as probably guessed, as we all perhaps guessed, even 77 years later, as they stepped on the bridge, virtually, the bridge went up, and as remarked, like Vesuvius at the top of our form. And a nice 500-foot bridge was in the river. But that we visit now, you can visit that area under the new road, and there's some debris in the river, whether that's a new bridge, old bridge, or debris from history. You can see the river is fairly, it looks fairly shallow, and you know, clearly when there's heavy rain, it becomes pretty flooded. But the bridge went up, so that part of the plan went down the Swanee. But actually, the river itself is shallow enough to be forded. So the Fogs went across on the afternoon of the 22nd, evening of the 22nd into the 23rd, and formed up. And it was a very uncomfortable bridgehead over the Trigno, as they all were. Because as I say, that even the geographical line was strong, the river, but the actual defensive forces of the Germans were 2 or 3 miles behind. So they had all the positions logged, so the artillery were throwing down onto the Fogs. The London Irish also went across and would form part of the bridgehead, and they would remain over the river for 4 days until the 27th. My father, again, he had to take the supplies over the river to E Company, who were on the other side of the river. And one of his experiences as he went across with his mule line, some Sikh muleteers were with him, but the positions of the ford were lodged by the German forces. And sure enough, in this particular moment, there was a lot of artillery stonk came in and killed quite a few of the Sikhs. And my father's memory were he was crossing the river, sadly, where men had died just a few hours before. So again, a typical experience for the men, I guess. That's Dad looking a bit dirty. That's from later in the campaign. That perhaps gives you an idea that sunny Italy in October. If anyone's been watching the Giro d'Italia, it's been, you know, clearly the weather break in Italy is clear in October, rains arrive, and obviously in the mountains, snow. Now, the attempt now was to try and take the town of San Salvo, which was a hilltop town about 3 miles to the northwest of the Trigno River. The bridgehead formed by the London Irish and the Fogs. So on the right of the road going towards San Salvo, the London Irish were going to advance to San Salvo through the wooded area to just on the other side of the river and directly take the town of San Salvo. Meanwhile, the Fogs were going to advance on the left side of the road and capture the feature on the left side of the town. So it was a two battalion attack, with each battalion would take 2 companies. The decision to attack would be on the night of the 27th of October. And hopefully a heavy barrage would be supporting. On the right-hand side on the coast, the Lancashire Fusiliers, as part of 11th Brigade, were actually going to try and take the station of San Salvo, a secondary attack. But the main advance of this time for the 78th Division was the 2 battalions of the London Irish. But fate was going to take hand for various reasons. Heavy rain, impossible country. And the brigadier asked for a postponement in the afternoon of the 27th of October, but this was not granted. And the actual artillery barrage overshot many of the defensive positions of the Germans. And the retort of the German forces was massive. So the sorry tale I will go through now for the Irish Brigade. Starting with the fogs. This is on the left side of the river. This picture was taken in May, so it probably doesn't give a good idea of what it might have been in October. But they were already over the river, the bridgehead. Just at about 11 o'clock, 78th Division artillery starts their fire, and A and B Company go forward. Immediately, they were under intense fire, and it was clear that the positions were well logged in the German ranges. The commanding officer, Beecham Butler, held an O group, but around midnight, he was killed by a bullet, MG bullet, machine gun bullet, in the head. B Company Major Dennis Dunn came forward, but again was hit by MG fire. And Paddy Proctor, who received the MC at Termoli, you probably remember, was hit and missing. And consequent 2 company commanders have been killed, and the commanding officer, Major Tommy Wood, took over battalion command. It was dreadful in the bridgehead for the fogs. And Tommy Wood, the new CO of Temporary Tesoro, at dawn, just before dawn, decided to take the battalion back over the river, or return to the bridgehead, so on the side of the river. 27 fogs were killed during the attack, and then the casualties were a multiple of that, up to about 100 men were wounded. None captured. Obviously, they were moving forward and bringing people back, but a significant problem for the Irish Fusiliers on that day, that evening, the 27th, 28th. Their difficulty was shared by the London Irish, who were on the right-hand side of the road to San Salvo. So again, a two company front, the F Company under Colin Gibbs on the right-hand side, and G under Geoffrey Phillips on the left. And again, at similar time before midnight, received and faced heavy concentrated defensive fire and a wall of machine gun fire. And they reported that actually 200 shells fell in the area around midnight that the fogs had to face in 6 minutes. And the fire continued until, as it said, until 3:30. F Company platoon commander Marmerstein was killed, F Company. And in early morning, while bringing up supplies, Kevin O'Connor's second command was killed by an enemy shell in the wood while supervising the supplies of the battalion. Marmerstein had actually come and joined the battalion on the same day as Desmond Woods. And Desmond, in his account, refers to Marmy. Well, it actually is another person referred to Marmy. He had only just joined the London Irish and was killed on the morning of the 28th. This picture of the fogs gives you the idea of the men. Tommy Wood, who took over the command on the left, Beecham Butler in the middle, the commanding officer was killed. Paddy Proctor, the MC, was awarded MC at Termoli, killed at killed at the Trigno River. And Dennis Dunn, I'm not exactly sure which of the men is Dennis Dunn, but again, he was killed on the 27th. That picture's taken in Tunisia, but it gives an idea of some of the men involved or the officers involved. Returning to Beecham Butler, that fantastic photograph, which was taken around the 5th, on the 5th of October en route to Termoli with Brian Clark. Beecham Butler with a cigarette in his hand, I think. And that was kindly donated and passed to us by Patrick, his son. And as Nelson Russell said, Beecham Butler was a tragedy for the whole brigade. And the Fogs lost one of its best commanding officers in peace or war, as he describes him. A small man, I think he was less than 5'7" tall, charming man, He was actually commissioned as a Royal Inniskilling Fusilier, but obviously in the pre-war period, the Skins and the Fogs were very closely entwined. And the initial burial at Termoli was very emotional. And Nelson Russell summarised, saying, "A sad, bad day for the Irish Brigade," and wished it would never be repeated. For the Fogs, it was extremely traumatic, obviously on a personal level, with the men being killed, but also they hadn't, you could say, been defeated previously in any battle. Even at Dunkirk, they had fought a retreat, a good retreat, if it's such a thing, and then also the battles in Tunisia. But this was extremely difficult for the battalion. Other personal witnesses: Captain Lawrence Franklin Vale, who was in A Company. He actually, under Dennis Dunn, he wrote a series of letters, and I'm sure many of you read them, that he wrote home to his wife, Olive, over 9 months from August 43 to May 44. And his memory of the fighting on the 27th, he was wounded in the chest himself, and remarks about, it perhaps is something that others will empathise with, and hopefully we all do to some extent. This letter to his wife was written in early November, and his thoughts about the death of Lieutenant John Glennie, his friend, and Dennis Dunn, the commanding officer. John Glennie, lieutenant, he had joined the Fogs with, come to Italy, Sicily initially, to join the 1st Battalion Fogs with Laurie Franklin Vale at the end of August, and the first battle he joined at Termoli, he was slightly got some shrapnel then, but he was killed on the 27th evening from Enniskillen, 27th, 28th. And Laurie Franklin Vale remarks about his words as he lay there shouting Frank, which was Lawrence Franklin Vale's nickname. John Glennie had a sister, Muriel, 22, a mother back in Enniskillen, and 2 brothers, George and Hugh. And as Lawrence Franklin Vale remarks, it was the blackest day for the Fogs in this war, and one of the worst of all times. That's one point of Lawrence Franklin Vale, which you probably know. He was actually an Australian, born in Melbourne, and was living in London and commissioned into the Fogs. But he had a very close friendship with John Glennie. And John Glennie's sister Muriel was a well-known figure in Enniskillen after the war. Maybe David Marshall and others may know their family, I don't know. So after that massive riposte, or defeat at the Trigno River, there was again a pause. The Fogs and the London Irish were brought back to near Termoli for rest and recuperation and reinforcement. And the rest of the 78th Division were brought up now after a few days. The Skins went initially into the bridgehead to take over from the Fogs. And then the other 2 brigades of the 78th Division brought up to seek to take the strong point of San Salvo. But it wouldn't be for another week that the plan was set. In this case, 36th Brigade were going to advance on the right towards Vasto across the San Salvo Ridge. And 11th Brigade would take a left turn and take the town of Capello. And the attack planned for the evening of the 3rd of November would be with tank support for the 4650 RTR was supporting. It was initially thought that the Irish Brigade would not take part in this attack, but the Skins were asked to take initial part in the plan to actually specifically advance on the town of San Salvo, where the 5th Buffs of 36th Brigade were onto the right-hand side of the ridge. And the attack went straight forward, wasn't straightforward at all, because the defensive positions of San Salvo were still there. But there was a bit of fighting actually on the day of the 3rd, but they did get into the town. There was back and forth with German forces, but the town was actually eventually captured on the early evening of the 3rd of November by the Skins, although it was a 78th Division battle. The 36th and 11th rushed through to seek to get to Vasto, to seek to bounce German forces back to the Sangro River as quickly as they could. One witness of the Skins assault was Captain Percy Hamilton, who was in A Company, I think, and he witnessed the attack. Percy Hamilton was from Dublin. No, actually, he was in C Company, sorry. So he was on the right-hand side. He was a platoon commander advancing on the right-hand side of the road, while the A Company were on the left-hand side. And they were going to then be reinforced by B and Company. Percy Hamilton, as I say, from Dublin, had joined the Irish Brigade in early 43 in Tunisia and was an intelligence officer in Sicily and now a platoon commander with C Company. And he witnessed the rest of C Company charge him. And similarly, on his left side, saw Captain David Schack, who was, in actual fact, wounded twice. He jumped onto a machine gun position. He was awarded the Military Cross for his action, Captain David Schack. I had the pleasure of meeting David's widow a few years ago, who lived in West London. David, interestingly, as you can tell, possibly tell from his surname, was an Iraqi, but an Iraqi Jew. His family had moved from what was probably Mesopotamia before Iraq was formalized after the First World War. But he was based in London. The Schack family were quite a well-known family in London. But David Schack, who was a Royal Ulster Rifleman, and later rejoined the Royal Ulster Rifles in the Western Front in France in 44. But at this stage, the Skin was awarded the Military Cross for his actions that day. Just remarking about two men who were killed, officers who were killed at San Salvo. Major Hobo Crocker, one of the heroes of Centuripa. He was one of the men who climbed the sheer cliffs to attack the German positions in August of 1943. Major Crocker was killed at San Salvo. Basil Hewitt, again in the A Company alongside Major Crockett, was killed, a friend of Percy Hamilton, and as Nelson Russell remarks, was one of the best subalterns in the brigade. Young man, as everyone was, I guess. And during this period, during the 2-month campaign, 200 men from the Irish Brigade are buried at 2 cemeteries, mostly at the Sangro River, but some at the Morrow Canadian CWC cemetery near Ortona. And this, as always, in beautiful locations and beautifully maintained. So that's the Sangro River and the Morrow River Canadian Cemetery. And some of the officers we've just mentioned who were killed, Beecham Butler, Commanding Officer Paddy Proctor, John Glennie, all buried at the Sangro River, alongside Dennis Dunn, one of the other company commanders. You can see that Paddy Proctor was commissioned in the Royal Ulster Rifles, but served with the Irish Fusiliers in Italy, and Beecham Butler, the Skin, who was commanding officer of the Royal Irish Fusiliers. London Irish officers and men, Kevin O'Connor, the second in command. My father really liked him because obviously as second in command, as CQMS, he dealt with the second in command, bringing up supplies a lot. He joined the London Irish in the middle of 1943. He was actually a King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantryman by birth. And he's buried at Sangro River. Michael Marmerstein is actually buried at the Canadian, because I don't think he was found initially. I think he was buried possibly by Germans, and then later they took him to the Morrow River. And the 4 riflemen below who were grouped together, again, are there buried at the Morrow River Canadian Cemetery. 3 from Northern Ireland, Moira, James King from Moira in County Down, James Johnson, Glaryford in County Antrim, north of Ballina, Alfred Glass from Belfast, and in that group in Norman Sharp from Shrewsbury. And Michael Marmerstein, Marmy, as we mentioned previously, obviously the Star of David. Quite a number of men who served in the Irish Brigade were Jewish. I'm sure Ron has a thought about that. After the difficulties at the Trigno River and San Salvo, where next for the Irish Brigade, and this will be the subject of the next talk. So the campaign continued. After the taking of San Salvo and the advance of Usto, the 78th Division reached the Sangro quite quickly and formed a bridgehead over the river. But the story to be told is that the rivers and the floods came down from the mountains, and the Sangro River was completely flooded. So the bridgehead over the river became an island, and it was very difficult. And it was only for another 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, before an actual set-piece battle could be set to try to seek to break the winter line northwest of the River Sangro and to San Vito. And then ultimately the Irish Brigade advanced into the Morra River south of Ortona at the start of December. And that will be the subject of the next talk at the end of November. So some significant battle periods over the next month for the Irish Brigade before Canadians would take over. And then, of course, much more difficulty at Ortona later in the year for the Canadians. That's the end of today's conversation from me anyway. And I'd like to thank those groups of families and historians and our friends in Italy and the archives of the Imperial War Museum and the National Archives. Thank you to you all for your support and continuing interest. And I just want to make one remark before I finish. Just loving memory of my partner who died 2 weeks ago in Thailand, Phnom. Thank you very much. And perhaps we can ask a few questions now. Just first of all, I'd like to ask Patrick Butler, if that's possible, to say a few words about his father, if that is at all possible. You're on mute, Patrick. You're on mute, Patrick, sorry. Still mute.
Good evening, can you hear me?
Now, are we clear?
Yeah, Patrick.
You can hear me?
We can hear you clearly.
Okay. It's very hard to summarize. Anything I've read or I know about my father is what other people have written about him, going right through from North Africa, Sicily, and right up to the Trigno. I think the one letter which we read the time in Oma probably says as much as anybody can about my father and how he operated as a commanding officer. You know, he was very quiet. They say he blinked when people spoke to him, but very strong-willed, obviously. And I think that was written by Fusilier Johnson. And it probably tells, explains what type of a man he was. I know there are other people who have written various things. And I think one of the things what I've read is coming right through from North Africa, my father had a bad habit of quietly going out and seeing what was out the front. And I think in Africa, they learnt that this wasn't very good practice. So they made sure that somebody kept an eye on him and always followed him out to make sure that he didn't get into trouble. I think on the night he was killed, I think it was Brian Clark told me, sadly before he died a number of years ago, that he'd gone ahead to see what was going on. That's when he was hit by a machine gun bullet. And Brian Clark, I know, has written to me in a couple of notes and books and just said that he was the person that actually came upon him. So that's really, you know, I'm just trying to remember a lot of things, and sometimes it's not easy. But
thank you, Patrick. Yes, sorry to put you on the spot there.
no, that's all right. It's
Even
my pleasure to do it.
Even 77 years to the day, it's still a difficult memory.
Mm-hmm. That's very correct. Yeah. The only good thing I was going to say on a lighter note, I know I can't remember who came over to talk to him one night. I think it was I was born in March 43. So somebody came over and they were chatting, and he'd just been told that he had a new arrival, myself.
Oh, yes. Fantastic. Yeah, he knew of you. Thank you, Patrick. Do you mind if I ask Adrian Woods, to make a few remarks about his father, Desmond, who we quoted a couple of points in that presentation? Maybe Adrian's not there. I see he's not sure. Adrian, sorry, maybe it's a bit. Just like to welcome, before Adrian comes on, is Duncan McNally, who's the son of Major McNally. He's in Hong Kong, would you believe? So 2 o'clock in the morning, no, 3 o'clock in the morning. Thank you, Duncan, for joining us. Don't need to say anything at the moment, but we might ask you later. Can I, Adrian, I'll get back to Adrian hopefully in a minute, Adrian Woods. May I ask Ron Goldstein, for a few reflections on his memory of that period, if he has any. You're on mute as well, Ron, sorry. Still on mute. Try and get you to unmute. Yeah, Ron, you're on mute still. Sorry to keep hassling you. Still on mute. Okay. Ron's muted forever, I think. We'd love to hear you, Ron. Okay. Changing the subject. Adrian's back. Adrian Woods, sorry. We'll come back to Ron in a minute. Hello, Adrian. Sorry to...
Yeah, sorry about that. I lost you guys. I was desperately trying to get back. Yeah, it was great seeing Dad sort of up there. I wasn't too aware of his time prior to Casino. I haven't really got anything particularly more to add, because I think I touched upon it at the last session. Just one little anecdote, though, I remember him telling me, was as his personal weapon, he picked up a Schmeischer submachine gun. Because I think, I presume they're probably Stens in those days, British, but the Germans probably had the best weapons, particularly with the Spandau and everything. So he used the Schmeischer for quite a while, till somebody mentioned to him that it could be pretty bad news if he got captured, because he would be less well looked upon, having picked it up from one of their dead comrades. So he decided to go back to the stern gun, which was probably quite prudent.
Very
Just
wise.
whilst I'm on, and I've got the opportunity of Patrick, you mentioned Brian Clark. Were you at his funeral?
No, unfortunately, I missed that.
Oh, right. No, I took my parents down there because they were getting on a bit at the time. And I just thought our paths might have crossed then.
Yeah, Brian Clark was the adjutant of the Irish Fusiliers at this time, a famous figure who was quite a strong man, I believe. Quite a very strong man.
Can I just say a few words about Brian Clark? I met him, obviously I was working in industry and it was kind of busy keeping my head down, but I met him in Dublin, and through relations and friends in Dublin, he sent me a message and everything, and we did meet up, and I went to have lunch with him at his house just in Wicklow. But sadly, he was in the first stages of Alzheimer's, and he would start to talk to me about those times, but his memory would just fade away. So I have what he has written to me in some earlier years, some very nice compliments. And it was actually Brian Clark, I think, who gave me that photograph, the last one I have of my father taken with him. It came through Brian, my understanding.
Yeah, it's a superb photo, isn't it? You know. Actually, the Giro d'Italia, as I keep going on about the cycle race, so we're actually on the Gargano Peninsula a couple of weeks ago, and those white cliffs, so you could actually see it on the TV, which was interesting. Can I have another go at Ron Goldstein? I don't know if you can demute yourself. If not, don't worry. Obviously not.
Right, I've unmuted.
Well done, thank you.
Right.
Just a simple question. I mean, we mentioned Termoli last time. Do you have any memory of this mid-October period?
Not really. I rely on you and your brother to write about those times, because my memory is so shocking. For the benefit of the rest of the crew watching this, I'm 97, and my memory is far from good about those times. And I rely very much on stuff I've already written. And so you've got control of this, and I'm sure you can dig up. I'm guilty of writing some 9,000 odd articles on WW2 Talk. So I'm sure that if you want to, your best bet is to, before a meeting of this type, is to find some of the stuff I've written about that particular period, because I'm sorry, mate, but I cannot remember.
That's all right. No, I was being a bit naughty there. No, we've had a good chat to you over many occasions, and your stories are fantastic. I mean, as I understand it, it never rains in Italy, does it? Perhaps I can ask some of our Italian comrades in a minute about that. Can I next go to, just for a few remarks, Duncan McNally. Thank you for getting up so late, or not going to bed in Hong Kong. Your father, I assume, was with I think he was with the Fogs during this campaign. He definitely was. And can you just say a few words about your father?
Yes, well, the interesting thing is that, sorry, my voice is a bit fading here. I have just got up. My father's time in the Irish Brigade is something that I didn't know a great deal about until I plugged into your website.
Just say who your father is first. Sorry.
He was commissioned during the war. He joined the army prior to the Second World War in the RAMC, and he was called up as a reservist, and had expressed the wish to join the infantry, and was commissioned in, I think, 1941 into the King's Regiment, was then transferred into the 8th Battalion of the King's Regiment, which is the Liverpool Irish, and from there was sent on a posting with some of his King's men to North Africa to join the Irish Fusiliers in July of '43, so just in time for the Sicily campaign. And I think his first action in the war was in Centauri Bay, and it was 2 days after that, or 3 days after that, at the River Simeto, that he won his MC for action crossing the river. And I understand from the war diaries that he quite quickly was promoted from lieutenant to major, and I think at the time you were talking about, the 26th to the 27th of October, due to the many losses in the Irish Brigade, he transferred from I'm not sure what his role was, probably platoon commander in C Company in the Irish Fusiliers to company commander of B Company, which is where he figures in Lawrence Franklin Vale's letters, because he became Lawrence Franklin Vale's company commander just after this action at San Salvo.
Yeah,
sorry,
thank you.
Sorry, the river Sangro. This particular
Trigno.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. Sorry, it's late night for you, and you've done remarkably well to recall all that at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go. Is Francesco on? Oh yes, there we go. Francesco. Just introduced Francesco, who's a battlefield guide in the Adriatic area, and I just wondered if he would like to say a few words about this campaign from an Italian point of view. You're on mute, Francesco. Is it possible for you to say a few words if you?
Okay, can you hear me?
You're very clear.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting Zoom conference. I really appreciate it because it's always interesting for me to share knowledge about this neglected campaign of the British 8th Army during the Second World War. And I really, I will be honest with you, this conference was very interesting because I don't really know very well the history of the 30th Irish Brigade into deep like you. And because now at the moment I'm studying the 36th Brigade, so the twin brigade of the 38th, and it was fantastic presentation. And I think we have to share, so we have to communicate this two important battle also to the British people and Italians, because it represents a very good lesson for the Commonwealth armies during the Second World War, and in particular during the Italian campaign.
Great. Thank you, Francesco. Just to give you, Francesco is a battlefield guide, so hopefully we'll get the chance to meet him at a later stage in the Adriatic area. Before Ian Mitchell goes for his tea, do you mind, Ian? Is it? Before you came on, I was remarking about the book you've written about the North African campaign. Do you want to say a few words about some of your interests in this time, Swifty, Howlett, and others like that? You're on mute as well.
Right, is everybody, can everybody hear me, hopefully?
Yeah, you're good.
Well, welcome to everybody. It's been interesting listening to it all, and thanks to Richard and Edmund for setting it up. It's a great pleasure to see the son of Beauchamp Butler, and that's been amazing just to have that, because he's a central figure in the book that I wrote about the Battle of the Peaks and Operation Sweep and Vulcan in Tunisia. For me, I think that the thread is quite simple, is that when I was doing the research for the Tunisian book, it became very apparent that a number of people who were present in Tunisia had sadly met their end in the Italian campaign at Termoli, at Trigno, and at the Sangro. And one of those who was Lieutenant Colonel Butler, who is an extraordinarily battlefield leader from the things that I have read and studied on the subject, along with Pat Scott, of course. So it's a great privilege to actually hear a number of people to sit and to actually see put faces to names from that perspective. The Sangro's bad also because, as you know, I don't want to steal thunder, but there are a number of people that die there. I have the pleasure of having the foreword to my book, written by General Sir Geoffrey Howlett, who in fact I talk to about every 2 weeks at the moment. In fact, to be precise, it was about 4 weeks ago that I last talked to him. I made the mistake of ringing him on a Saturday afternoon when he was watching racing, and that didn't go down too well. But he, of course, his father was killed, at the Sangro, and a number of other people. So for me, the thread is quite simple. Is the interest is the 78th Division goes on to Italy. A number of key figures that are involved, including for instance, the Commander Royal Engineers were killed at the Sangro, and it's been a great pleasure to listen in to this presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
I see Edward Graham is with us, and I'm not sure. It's up to you whether you want to say anything, Edward. Just to introduce Edward, his father, Edward Graham Senior, was killed in Sicily in 1943 on the 13th of August near Mileto, the town of Mileto, on the northwestern slopes of Mount Etna. And you might all know that the recovery and the confirmation of his final resting place was only confirmed by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission 3 years ago. And we had the distinct, humbling pleasure of joining Edward and his twin brother Sidney at a ceremony in Sicily then. Thank you for joining us, Edward, and it's great to see your face.
Not at all. Not many people say that about my face, Richard. There you go.
I won't put you on the spot too much, but it's great to have you today, and we hope to see you soon whenever we can come out of this this COVID crisis. Sorry to mention that phrase.
Hold on, Richard. It's wonderful. I think that you're keeping this thing going, because the more I hear about the Italian campaign, the more I come to the conclusion that it deserves a lot wider exposure. A lot of people talk about Normandy and one thing and another, but for me, the Italian campaign is very much under publicised and undervalued. It was tremendously hard campaign. Everything you hear about it, the difficulties of the terrain, the difficulties of supply, the difficulties about replacing officers and whatnot. An appallingly difficult campaign, and I have nothing but the utmost admiration for the people that took part in it, and I hope very much that we'll have the pleasure, all of us, of going back there, as you say, as soon as this darned virus gets out of the way. It would be great to get back out there. And,
thank you, Edward. And I think Ron Goldstein is going to leave the Battlefield Party, I think we've decided. Thank you, Ron. That's a joke, by the way, so don't worry. Not a very good joke. Just others on the call. David Marshall in Omagh in Northern Ireland. We will speak about your uncle in the next talk, David Marshall Senior. Thank you for joining us. And you went to the Trigno River last year, didn't you, with a group of your colleagues? You're on mute, by the way. Do you want to say a few things, or do you? It's like giving us the sign of the cross.
Right, got it. It's been a pleasure once again to join you, especially Duncan so far away, and to see and hear firsthand. Ron, these men are now getting very thin on the ground, and it's great to have them with us. Maybe just fill in a little of the background, the link between Patrick and myself, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Remind me of the date of your father and mother's wedding, Patrick.
It was June 1938.
Yes, June 1938.
I have to quickly look for the exact date, but
well, that's fine.
Near enough.
My father, Ernie Marshall, and his elder brother, the said David Marshall, rode on their bicycles to the local village of Clogher to see a wedding. That's not something that young lads are akin to do, but the attraction was, my father telling it often, that they were keen to go and view this military wedding. The wedding was between, or the nuptial, shall we say, was between the daughter of local Major Stewart, Vera Stewart, and this young dashing officer known as Beecham Butler. Now, I always thought that that was my father's pronunciation of his Christian name. For years, I think, like, it may have been Ian Mitchell there, did he say Lord Beauchamp? I was calling him Beauchamp Butler for years. Because in French, looking at it on the page, it looks like Beauchamp. But actually, my father was perfectly correct. Beecham Butler. The irony in all of this is that whilst Daddy and Uncle David rode to see the wedding, within 5 years, both Beecham Butler and David Marshall would have been laying to rest in the soil of Italy, not many miles hence from each other.
Yeah, very close.
And so my father related that often and within my earshot as I was growing up. And then in subsequent years, I took on to document the history of the local special constabulary here in this area. And one of my point of contacts was Patrick's uncle, Hugh Stewart. His father, Patrick's grandfather, was a local district commandant in the special constabulary, and this is between the war years. So it is through Hugh Stewart, Patrick's uncle, that I eventually got to meet Patrick, and it is a delight, it's a privilege to have such a close link here with these men. Ron is here in person, and Adrian is here, direct generation down from his father who served, and to have Patrick here in representation of his late father, it is a privilege, but I'm not walking anymore. That's just the link between the Marshall household and the Stewart household and the Butler household.
And it continues to the future. Last but not least in this roundabout is Dr. Vitale in Sicily. Thank you for joining us again, Felice.
It is my pleasure to see you again and to attend this interesting remarks about the invasion of mainland of Italy. And of course, there are many topics to stress and to address. Indeed, the Allied, during their fighting in mainland of Italy, had the same support they had in other terrains. I think of the lacking of tanks support, and even of commandos beyond the German lines. I think in particular the possibility to overtook the German troops by means of disembarking on the shores beyond the lines of Germans. Maybe the Allied had enough to do with preparing the Operation Overlord in Normandy, but this was costly for Allied troops in the mainland of Italy, where they had to take count mainly on their bravery.
Yes, well said. Yeah, there's many reasons for the problems in Italy for the Allies. Thank you, Felice. I'll give the type of last word to Edmund, my brother, if he could pass on a few summation comments. See you, Ian. Good to see you.
Yeah, all I want to say, Richard, another really interesting and complete, very detailed and highly personal presentation of a little-known part of the little-known campaign, which paid due respect to key figures, and particularly, of course, Beecham Butler. It was really hard time. You read the records. It was really tough for them. And a lot of it was spent out in the open. I encourage people to go and visit it. We've done it a couple of times. Lovely part of the world. And you can cover the ground between the Trigno and the Sangro in less than an hour. But you can see the ground is very much as it was. So you can easily imagine what the armies faced, both sides, in this battle that's been forgotten. So I just want to say thank you, Richard. It's been really great. The only other thing I wanted to say is that we're doing another one of these, but we're doing one on the Sangro fairly soon. But I just want to give an advance further advertisement for a special Zoom about the Palestine campaign in 1917-1918 and the role of the London Irish Rifles in the capture of Jerusalem in December 1917. It's a little known war. We go into the First World War because it is the London Irish Rifles, but it's a campaign that involved the 10th Irish Division, which include representatives of all the regiments were in the Irish Brigade in the Second World War. So there's a backward continuity, but it's a very dramatic